Airplanes, more than any other development, have changed the face of war in the 20th century. Among aviation experts, pilots, and enthusiasts, there has long been a spirited debate as to which aircraft, be it a bomber, fighter, or attack craft, is the very best of all time. Join us as we look at superior planes in each aircraft category and finally settle all bets during Air Power Showdown. Fighters. Fighters. Comparatively simple, small, and quick aircraft designed mainly for one purpose: to gain and hold control of the sky over a war zone. They first took to the skies in battle during World War I, with continuing refinements ever since. The battle commanders want air superiority, and fighters can give it to them. The force that controls the air will less likely suffer air attack on its own ground forces and installations, and in turn, with air superiority over the enemy's territory, an attack, whether on the ground or from the air, is all the more sure. But air superiority has never come easily. For as one fighter gains refinements that make it better in the dogfight, the next model from the opposing air force will likely match or better that performance. Ultimately, given pilots of similar skills and weapons of comparable capability, the airplane that outturns, outtwists, outshoots, and outruns the competition will likely take control of the skies. Today, however, fighters have to outturn, outtwist, outshoot, and outrun another kind of enemy, the missile, whether fired from the ground or from another airplane that may be miles out of sight, or from even beyond the expected battle area. Even so, the basic mission of the fighter going into the 21st century is not too much different from that of the fighters that first battled over Europe during World War I. A pilot, a high-performance, highly maneuverable airplane, and the best weapons available to blast adversaries from the sky.
We sometimes forget that enemy bombs have not fallen on American soldiers' heads for 50 years. And that's because of the great air superiority fighters that this nation has produced.
We're going to take a look at fighters from World War I to today, focusing on those that have been picked as the top airplanes in each of 6 eras by a worldwide panel of experts assembled by the editors of Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. A panel of 25 historians, combat flying veterans, commanders, test pilots, and fighter designers. Also, a CompuServe forum offered the public the opportunity to vote. By the end of this program, you'll find out which one was selected as the best fighter ever. But first, how do you judge a fighter? Just what criteria do the experts use to evaluate the qualities of a fighting aircraft? Perhaps most important for fighters is their maneuverability, often referred to as transient performance by the airplane designers. This feature blends the airplane's ability to dive dramatically, climb powerfully, the kind of climb an F-15 has with full afterburner power.
You know, there's nothing more fun than doing an afterburner climb and standing around her tail and just watching, you know, the F-15 become a Saturn V for a few seconds.
Turn sharply. For example, the F-16 is among the top fighters in a tight turn.
All things being equal, if you fly the airplane properly, I'm going to be able to turn with anybody better than most. In fact, better than just about any airplane I've ever faced. And in the right hands, I'm going to be pointing at him first.
And how does maneuverability translate into an air combat win?
If you went into a diving high-speed, high-G turn, and they couldn't keep up with you in that kind of a turn. So there were some tactics like that that let you pit one airplane against another to your advantage if you knew what you were doing.
Visibility is another key element. Even with radar and with airborne control airplanes aiding the fighters, the fighter pilot often relies on what he sees to win the dogfight. It's this kind of unobstructed visibility that can give a pilot the edge. F-16 pilots commonly say they feel they're riding on an airplane rather than in one. Range is a critical factor. The ability to carry enough fuel to get from a safe base or carrier into the battle and have enough fuel to fight and get home again. Survivability is another key element.
It would sustain a tremendous amount of battle damage and come home. I never knew of a Phantom that blew up in the air. When they would catch fire, they would burn, and normally we could possibly fly to try to get to a safe area before bailing out.
The firepower aboard can make all the difference. Whether it's the early improvement in machine guns on the World War I biplanes and triplanes, the 650 calibers on the P-51, or the multiple missiles available for use on the F-15.
I can shoot and destroy the enemy aircraft prior to him ever seeing me. So right there I have a definite advantage.
If you have the better weapons and more of them, you have a better chance in battle. Ceiling, the maximum altitude at which the fighter can effectively operate, is another measure.
To win a battle, air battle, you have to have maneuverability, acceleration, and usually altitude. And we always try to have altitude.
A fighter's speed assists in moving it to or out of the fray. And wartime kill rates are the ultimate win or lose measure of effectiveness against the adversary. So these are the considerations that go into building a fighter. A complex set of decisions and trade-offs involving cost, size, weight, and complexity, and shaped by anticipated needs and technical capacities at the time of design. But it boils down to two words: combat effectiveness. Does the fighter have what it takes to give its pilot the ability to kill and not be killed?
You use whatever, save your bleep. It's very difficult to tell you that. Now, if I've just been bounced, if he's coming in at me and I didn't see him approaching, I'm in deep, deep trouble. And your main idea there is not to be a dead hero, but a live pilot for the next day. So you do everything in your power to avoid getting killed.
But there is something more, too, an intangible factor. And that's the strength and depth of feeling that pilots have for their fighters. Today's fighter pilot duels in a complex assembly of metal, electronics, and thrust, with guns and missiles ready at the fingertips. The pilots and those who see and hear the airplanes and the battle reports develop a strong visceral reaction for the fighters at work. Let's look at the top fighters in each era and the airplanes voted best within their group. The first era of fighting airplanes encompasses 1910 to 1925. Practical airplanes had first been proven only a few years before this era began. But with World War I, the airplane flew into battle, and young, creative designers went to work. They developed types and uses of airplanes that hadn't been imagined, from adept and quick fighters to lumbering multi-engine bombers. And factories sprung up to build airplanes in huge volume. The nominees for top fighters are the Nieuport 17, a light and agile French fighter flown by some of the most famous Allied aces of World War I. The Fokker DR-1 triplane, the airplane of choice for the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. It was highly maneuverable, but also highly unstable. The Sopwith Camel, Britain's most famous World War I fighter, named for the hump that housed twin Vickers machine guns in front of the pilot. The Spad, among the fastest and most rugged of the war, U.S. Army Air Service pilots, including top U.S. ace Eddie Rickenbacker, preferred it over all other types. And the Fokker D-7, The D stood for doppeldecker, 2 wings. It had no wire bracing in the wings, and with low drag and high strength, it could be pushed hard in combat. And the winner, the Fokker D7. Powerful, rugged, maneuverable, and easy to fly, it was a fighter pilot's dream. The German pilots identified closely with their new airplane, which first saw combat in the last year of the war. Each pilot added his own insignia to maintain some sense of individuality in a war of mass slaughter. Peter Gross is a leading World War I historian who specializes in German aviation.
Yeah, the Fokker D7 was probably the best plane of World War I. And I would say that the primary reason is that almost anybody could fly it without special instruction. Two-seater pilots could easily get into that cockpit and with just a little bit of transition instruction, fly it. Now, the second thing, he felt safe in that airplane. It was almost stall-proof. It had the great big thick Fokker wing like you see here, so that it could almost stand on its tail attacking the enemy if that was necessary. It was truly a pilot's airplane from the standpoint of maneuverability. In the standpoint, it was a great gun platform. Had nice stable wings. And it had a steel tube fuselage which protected the pilot in case of a crash. The Fokker D7 was a good airplane because the man who designed it was Tony Fokker. He was 26 years of age. He was the same age as the fighter pilots. He had incredible rapport with the fighter pilots, so the fighter pilots could tell them what they wanted, and he would go to the front or he'd talk to them and you'd find out, what do we want in an airplane?
Peter Kilduff, a World War I aviation historian.
I would take the example of Carl Degelow, commanding officer of Jagdstaffel 40, who performed the rare feat of capturing an airplane in the air. And he did that by virtue of the fact that the Fokker D7 was so responsive and so quick in everything it had to do. He was in a fight with a 2-seat British fighter plane, a Bristol fighter, and by pulling back on the controls, he got the observer to expend all of his ammunition. So he just pulled in, waggled his wings ever so slightly, so that the crew of the 2-seater knew that if they tried anything, Degelow would shoot them down in a heartbeat. But they just went down slower and slower. Finally, the 2-seater landed. Degelow circled around once. He landed, got out of the airplane, came over and said, "Good day, you are English, you are my prisoner."
The Fokker D7, from a pilot's perspective, from what we know from the many pilots I've talked with, from literature, and the Germans and the British, of course, filed combat reports. One, it was easy to fly. It was not a handful of airplanes. You could probably fly it stick off, and it would maintain a level attitude. On the other hand, by virtue of the way it was designed, it was maneuverable enough to tangle with any Allied airplane. And I think every airplane, to be really successful with a pilot, in my opinion, it has to give the pilot confidence that this is the safest vehicle that he's up in the air with.
1926 through 1942 represents the next major era of airplane developments. The evolution from the wooden fabric creations of the first wartime era to sleeker, low-wing airplanes, often incorporating metal structures. Germany first put its airplanes from this era to the wartime test, assisting Franco in the Civil War in Spain. In the U.S., developments were spurred by barnstorming pilots, record setters like Lindbergh, and the evolving business of air transport. Nominees for the best fighter during this period are the Messerschmitt Bf-109, Designed in 1934, it dominated Europe for Germany through the summer of 1940 until finally pitted against newer British fighters. The Hawker Hurricane. It was the Royal Air Force's first modern fighter with closed cockpit, retractable landing gear, 8 guns, and 300-mile-an-hour speed. The Supermarine Spitfire. It evolved from a line of high-speed seaplane racers and became the symbol of Britain's will to fight back against almost impossible odds. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. Distinctive with its gnarling shark teeth, the P-40 in the hands of the Flying Tigers and other Army pilots held the Japanese at bay in the early months of the war. The Mitsubishi A6M Reason. This is the infamous Zero, Japan's most produced and used fighter that was in service for Japan from 1940 to the end of the war. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat. With a strong record of kills in the Pacific, this was the first monoplane carrier-based fighter, which in 1941 replaced obsolete biplanes from the carrier decks. The winner, Britain's Supermarine Spitfire. The Spitfire wasn't the fastest fighter, nor did it carry excessive fuel, but its wide wings gave it strong turn and climb performance. And the reliable Rolls-Royce Merlin 3 engine that was already proven in the Hurricane powered the new Spitfires as well. And it was well armed. Early versions carried 8 Browning machine guns. Hurricanes, along with Spitfires, were the primary defenders of Britain against 109s escorting invading German bombers during the Battle of Britain. Gunther Roll flew 109s on the Russian front, then in the Battle of Britain, and for 5 more years of the war, and was the number 3 ace in the world with 275 enemy kills.
I was very familiar with the 109, knowing the disadvantages also in the flight envelope versus the Spitfire, for instance. A Spitfire climbed in a tight turn much better than a 109 did. So you should know in which area of the flight envelope you are superior to the other one. And there are few, only few. But we had very good ammunition, we had very good weaponry aboard the aircraft. We had the 20mm gun, we had the 15mm gun, very effective.
Peter Townsend, Royal Air Force Group Commander.
And I told my boys, or the pilots in my squadron, if you get a Messerschmitt on your tail, turn and turn and turn. Don't dive, don't climb, otherwise he'll get you. And it did happen that you would keep turning. If he stayed with you, maybe in a couple of turns you would get in behind him. And too bad for him.
An American, Jim Goodson, flew 200 missions and had 32 kills. He first flew Spitfires with the Royal Air Force in 1940.
Well, in the early days of the war, it was mostly scrambling to go up and try and stop the German bombers coming over. In the days I was flying the Spitfire, and the Spitfire itself was really a defensive airplane. And so we'd be sitting in the thing and waiting to be scrambled. They'd shoot off a flare and we'd scramble when the German planes were coming over to bomb England. And so most of our missions were very short. The Spitfire itself had a very short range.
Herbert Knabel, a German HE-111 bomber pilot during the Battle of Britain.
And one thing I recall, the English fighter pilots, the Spitfires, they were absolutely fantastic. They came from above and straight down onto the formation and picked somebody and shoot them to pieces, and then they turned around and dove into the underneath the bombers just at the time when we released the bombs. Naturally, no fighter was following them, because they had the perfect protection. That's the way they came back. But it was, when I saw this, it was absolutely unbelievable the way they did it, the way they came down. It was great, I mean, I didn't feel so great at the time, but later on, when you think about the way they did it, it was just fantastic.
Every pilot fell in love with the Spit. It was a pilot's airplane. And it was so maneuverable, very light to the touch. You moved your stick a half an inch and you were in a slow roll. That was what it was like to fly a Spitfire. You became part of the plane. And when you were looking around, you were constantly turning the plane around rather than your head. We were delighted to get Spitfires because it was faster, could outturn the Hurricane, and it was a delight to fly. It was like pulling on a tight pair of pants. You became part of the airplane, and everybody that flew the Spit had a love affair with it. They just loved it.
The 4 years, 1943 through 1946, was the most astounding period ever in airplane development. There was a war to be won, and it was being fought in the air as much as anywhere else. Design and construction came at a feverish pitch from nations on all sides. A new crop of airplanes came to the front with fighting ranges 3 times greater than those of fighters at the beginning of World War II. The new models took giant strides as well in climb, agility, and firepower over those developed before the war. The nominees for top fighters from this era are the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. A creation of Kelly Johnson's team at Lockheed, it offered the safety of a second engine and was the fighter flown by Richard Bong, America's #1 ace. The Vought 4 FU Corsair. It was the first Navy fighter to be able to top 400 miles per hour. Its kill ratio record by war's end was 11 kills for every F-4U lost. The Focke-Wulf FW-190. It proved to be Germany's most potent piston-powered fighter, the first with a clear canopy and a speedy, maneuverable threat that matched any Allied opposition. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat. It entered the war in 1943, and in 2 years, its pilots had destroyed almost 5,200 enemy aircraft, 75% of the Navy's combat kills during the period. The North American P-51 Mustang. Early Allison engine models were only modest successes, but with a Rolls-Royce engine and extra fuel, it got what it needed. And the Messerschmitt Me-262. This was the first operational jet with a top speed of 540 miles an hour, and when its engines worked, it totally outflew any piston engine fighter. The winner, the P-51 Mustang. But it was not the first version of the airplane with its Allison engine that gave the airplane its claim to greatness. Those early models designed to British specifications were used as tactical fighters, reconnaissance airplanes, and dive bombers. But several modifications made it the best American fighter of World War II. The addition of a bubble canopy to improve pilot tracking and targeting of his adversary, and more power in the form of a Rolls-Royce Merlin supercharged V12 engine and more fuel to run it. The P-51 had 6 50-caliber machine guns. James Brooks, a P-51 ace who escorted bombers into the heart of Germany.
The feel of this airplane gave you a great deal of confidence. You felt like you were in control. The roll rate of the airplane was fast, so when you wanted to maneuver right or left, that happened very fast. But I'm saying that the controls were very responsive. Not only at low altitudes, but at high altitudes also. It was remarkable that it would perform so well at those high altitudes.
During the war, as the Germans advanced, flight distances and time in the air became more and more a factor for Allied aircraft. The Mustang had to escort the bombers to the heart of Germany and still have fuel to fight and return to its base in England or Italy.
The great distances that we had to fly before we even got close to engaging the enemy. Get up to 5:30, briefing at 6. Breakfast 6:30, go back and say your prayers, or go to the bathroom or whatever, then you go to the aerodrome, which was 30 minutes away. Now it's 8 o'clock. 3 squadrons take off, you rendezvous, and you start into Germany. These guys haven't gotten up. But I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position, but still, this Mustang was doing it for you. It was doing all the work. It would take you there and bring you back if you were smart enough to get back. unbelievable.
One of those P-51 pilots dodging clouds and downing Messerschmitts over Europe was Bob Goebel, then a 21-year-old second lieutenant.
So we would keep our speed up, running on our drop tanks, and scissor across the top, watching that no enemy fighters formed up. Now, we'd see contrails sometimes up very high, but maybe they would pass us up, or they'd come down. Now, sometimes if they'd come down, they'd get a first pass in. You couldn't stop them from making a first pass if they came down from altitude, but we'd engage them then and drive them off or do whatever we could to keep the bombers safe.
Well, the war would have lasted a lot longer if it hadn't been for the Mustang to have the capability to escort the heavy bombers deep into Germany. No question that it contributed so much to that.
And there have been some very nice airplanes over the period that you described. It'd be very difficult for me to pick one, but if I had to, I would have picked the P-51 Mustang because I had such good success with it and felt as keenly and as personally toward it as I do. But I'd like to think that objectively that's a good choice. That's a proper choice. But I firmly believe that the P-51 Mustang was a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence and was indeed the best fighter that came along in its day, in its own day, had the greatest impact and was the best machine around.
The next era, 1947 through 1960, encompassed the Korean War. And in every wartime encounter after World War II, pilots in jet-powered fighters would duel for control of the skies. The ME-262 set the tone for many that followed as jet designs evolved and improved rapidly. They often featured swept wings, leading-edge slats for better slow speed control, and a flying tail for added maneuverability. Two of the main combatants in the Korean War are nominees for Best of the Era. The North American F-86 Sabre. It was easy to fly, reliable, and featured an advanced radar-ranging gun sight for rapid targeting of the adversary. The Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15. It evolved from captured German design information, and its effectiveness was due in part to Rolls-Royce jet engines sold by Britain to the Russians in 1947. And Britain's Hawker Hunter, introduced early in the 1950s, it quickly was recognized as a fine all-around fighter of its decade and remains in service to some nations today. The winner, the F-86 Sabre. MiG-15s and F-86s tangled over Korea in a more complex and high-speed repeat of the battles between Spitfires and Messerschmitt 109s during the Battle of Britain. The Soviet MiG outgunned the early F-86s, and the MiG-15 was more maneuverable at high altitude, but at lower levels, the Sabre had the edge, particularly in roll rate. It had more advanced gun sights than the MiG, and the Sabre also had better climate control systems in the cockpit, so it could dive rapidly without fogging up the canopy. A distinct advantage put to use by Boots Bisset, who had flown P-51s after World War II and later flew F-4 Phantoms over Vietnam.
The airplanes were good. There were things we could do that the MiG couldn't do. The MiG rolled over at 35,000 feet and went straight down. And you knew darn well you were going to be able to get him because as he went down, his pressurization system was very poor and it iced up. And by the time he got to probably 25,000 feet, he couldn't see out of the airplane. He's on instruments. And he had to get down and get to lower altitude, roll it out, and then very gradually let the warm air in the cockpit take the frost off his canopy. So that was a real boon. If you could, if you get up there and get behind him and make him dive, you had a real advantage over him.
John Glenn, a U.S. Senator and in 1962 the first American to orbit the Earth, honed his combat skills during 100 missions as an F-86 pilot over Korea.
The ability to dive at high speed, it was the first of our fighters really that was a supersonic fighter. You couldn't go supersonic in level flight with it, but you could roll over and go supersonic going down on a dive. And so that was the first of our airplanes that you could really do that with.
The F-86's controls, its ailerons for turn and elevators for climb and descent were hydraulically boosted, which gave it superior roll and pitch control. But it was essentially a simple, easy-to-fly airplane.
It was a light flying airplane, very responsive, and you could wrap it up, pull hard into it, and you never needed to worry about pulling anything off of that airplane. It was very ruggedly built.
During the Korean conflict, Boots Blesse's last mission was his most memorable. 4 MiG-15s jumped Blesse and his wingman in a surprise attack. Blesse tangled with 2 of the MiGs, hitting one with machine gun fire, which caused those 2 to leave. He directed his wingman to continue back to base. At this point, Blesse was at 9,000 feet and running low on fuel. He began climbing for better range to get home.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a single MiG coming down here toward me, and I thought, oh boy, school's out. I don't have time to fight with this guy, and I'm up above the DMZ. I'm going to end up a PW if I'm not very careful here. And the guy kept right on going and letting down. He never saw me. And as he went by me like this, I looked at my fuel gauge, I looked at my watch, and I thought, well, what the hell? And I turned over and swung in behind him, and it took a real good shot at him from close range, and he burst into flame and black smoke and a bunch of stuff, and the airplane kind of went like this, and he bailed out of it, and the airplane went in.
Like every pilot who depended on an airplane in combat, the feelings of F-86 pilots are clear.
It was the best all-around fighter of that time period. I got 3 MiGs, shot down 3 MiGs in the last 9 days of the war. And we were really getting into them at that time, so we got into a lot of combat scrapes, and nowhere in any of those missions would I ever have traded the F-86 for the MiGs.
It did a lot for the country at the time in which it was being used there in Korea. It did a lot for me. It put me in a position to become an ace, which was something that I had dreamed about since I was about 8 years old, and Rickenbacker was my hero all my life. And you can blow the opportunity, or you can take advantage of it. And but it certainly puts you in a position to do things that you wouldn't have been able to do before. And I look at the 86 that way very much.
1961 to 1970 is a distinct era for its experimentation and application of new technologies. It brought crude electronic computers into airplanes, opened the door to missile-firing fighters, and ushered in combat aircraft routinely capable of supersonic flight. But the era began during a period worldwide of relative peace, and the U.S. was shaving defense budgets. The military services sought to combine resources by creating the do-everything airplane. 3 aircraft stand out as the fighter nominees for this era. The Dassault Mirage 3, France's first supersonic fighter, became a popular export model and served Israel in 2 wars against Arab-flown MiGs. Its kill ratios were among the highest ever. The MiG-21, 11,000 of them were built, making it, as far as its pervasiveness, the most successful fighter ever. It was sleek, maneuverable, and supersonic, and easily maintained. And the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. It was a multi-role airplane, capable of carrying everything from cameras to nuclear bombs. The winner, the F-4 Phantom II. The Phantom was designed as a multi-role, multi-service aircraft. It was put into use by the Air Force, Navy, and Marines, and used as a bomber, a ground attack airplane, and a fighter, and could switch roles mid-mission if need be. It is also the only fighter among our winners with pilot as well as a second crew member serving as a weapons officer. The airplane was not exceptional at any role, but it was competent at all of them. And most of all, it was reliable and rugged, with twin GE turbojet engines. The Phantom was the paragon of strength and power. It was common dogma during the Vietnam War that if the Phantom didn't hit the enemy on the ground with its weapons, it would scare them to death with its noise and thunder. Steve Ritchie flew it during the Vietnam War and ended up with 5 combat kills against MiGs.
The F-4 did everything. It did air-to-air, air-to-ground. We did what we called sky spot, combat sky spot in Vietnam. We escort, close air support, interdiction, combat air patrol. The F-4 did everything that was done by a fighter airplane in Vietnam. It did virtually every mission that it was called upon to do, and it did it in a very acceptable manner. It wasn't really superior in any mission because it was built to do so many different things. But the great thing about the Phantom, which caused many of us who flew it to have a lot of confidence, is that it was so rugged. It was big and powerful and rugged. It would sustain a tremendous amount of battle damage and come home.
A Vietnam ace with 5 kills and his F-4 hit by a surface-to-air missile after one of his dogfights, that pilot, Randy Cunningham, was later elected to the U.S. House of Representatives.
Even after I was hit with a missile, she held together to get me out over the Gulf so I could eject. You know, any good lady that takes that good care of you, you got to have fond memories of her.
Robin Olds, who'd flown P-51s during World War II, also flew Phantoms and commanded F-4 fighter groups 25 years later.
I noticed a MiG down right on the deck in the center of this melee doing a figure 8. He's just turning to go to his base, and between him and his base was a small row of low hills. And he saw me, but I'm behind him. And what's he going to do? If he pulled up to go over those hills, I'm going to plug him with a Sidewinder. If he didn't pull up, he's going to run into the hills. I mean, he was between a rock and a hard place. He chose the hard place. When he came up this little valley, here was the ridge in front of him. He pulled up over it, and just as I got daylight from my Sidewinder, I let it go. And it went right up his tailpipe.
You have to use your power in the vertical, and you have to force the enemy to fight your fight instead of fighting his fight. If you try and get engaged with him and fight the fight of a MiG, you're going to lose. And so I think with the overall tools that we had against the MiGs, both the weapon system, the platform, and the wing, we had a much better machine.
Steve Ritchie's most memorable day of air combat came on July 8, 1972. In the air 150 miles away was a radar airplane called Disco with a controller who knew Ritchie and where he was flying that day.
I heard, Steve, they're 2 miles north of me. I made an immediate left turn to a heading of north. Picked up a MiG-21 at 10 o'clock. So you see, if I had stayed on that easterly heading just a few more seconds, the MiGs would have been right in our 6 o'clock. We probably would not have seen them. I probably wouldn't be here to tell you the story today. So as a result of that coordination and that radio call from the Disco controller 150 miles away saying, Steve, they're 2 miles north of you, not only was I able to identify the MiGs, pick up the MiGs, and keep us from being shot down, we were able to down those 2 MiGs in a total of 1 minute and 29 seconds in one of the classic low-altitude air battles in fighter history.
The F-4 was a huge, powerful, ugly, wonderful, modern aircraft. Fit its role like the devil in hell. I love that airplane. It would carry more bombs than a B-17. It would go fast as greased lightning. It was a beast in a dogfight. It would slam you around. It would turn and twist, and it was strong, it was reliable, and then it would fly you home docilely and land like a feather. Beautiful airplane.
The current era of fighters dawned in 1971 and includes the high-powered, high-performance fighters in service today from the U.S. and Russia. Air combat took on a new tone over the past 2 decades because with increasingly powerful radar, long-range smart missiles, and AWACS-type airplanes available to oversee the battlefield, air combat could become a battle of distant missiles or a close-in dogfight. Also, as agility increased and electronic weapons technology multiplied, demands on the pilot became more extreme. The fighter nominees for the current era are the Northrop Grumman F-14 Tomcat. Variable sweep wings let it fly slow or fast. It also has onboard radar that can track 24 targets and fire at 6, all at the same time. The McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle. It was the replacement for the F-4, but more specialized in design as a fighter. With greater than 1-to-1 thrust to weight, it can accelerate straight up. The Lockheed Martin F-16 Fighting Falcon. Envisioned as a small, lightweight dogfighter, it was the first fighter with totally computer-activated controls called fly-by-wire. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-29. The Soviet answer to the new generation of U.S. fighters, the MiG-29 is rugged and easily field serviceable and usable from just about any flat terrain. And the Sukhoi Su-27. It's Russia's most modern operational fighter, with plenty of excess power and a large cache of missiles that can be fired by a pilot wearing a helmet-mounted sight. And the winner is the F-15 Eagle. This was a close contest between two combat-proven veterans. The F-15, with air combat service by U.S. pilots in the Gulf War, and the F-16, with air combat missions flown by Israeli pilots. The F-15 came up the winner. The F-15, originally conceived as a replacement for the Air Force's F-4 Phantoms, represents the style of jet fighter that is in most common service today. Redundant control systems, abundant electronics and radar systems, a lifting body type design, similar to the Russian MiG-29 and the U.S. Navy F-14 Tomcat, and twin jet engines rear-mounted that give it the kind of raw power that can propel it upward like a rocket. On the flip side of the fighter coin is the F-16, originally conceived as small and hard to spot, lightweight, a kick to fly, and comparatively inexpensive. The ultimate dogfighter along the lines of the Spitfire or even the Fokker D-7. Major John Porter flies F-16s out of Tucson, Arizona.
So if I want to point my nose over here or whatever, I've generally got the capability to do it. And if the nose won't go over there, it's because the flight control system won't let me. And like I said, that makes the airplane a lot easier to manage. And because of that, I'm much more effective employing my weapon system. And I usually, especially against something like an F-15, I usually get there unnoticed and get the kill.
The F-16 does not carry the load of missiles or elaborate electronics that have come to be expected from fighters in late 20th century air combat. For more and more often, they need the ability to fight beyond visual range, or BVR, from the enemy. So an airplane like the F-15 that can shoot missiles from afar and handle the twists and turns of a close-in dogfight is likely to be seen as the superior airplane. At the 71st Tactical Fighter Squadron, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Brady oversees operations and has had fighter flying assignments in both F-15s and 16s.
Well, I have to look at it from my perspective as an air superiority pilot. In that, I view the F-15 as the most, or the best aircraft in the world to be able to perform in that environment. It has the radar, the avionics, and the ordnance load to be able to excel in that environment.
Pilots of the 71st fly air combat training exercises against other fighters in the Air Force and Navy fleets, and French and British fighters as well. Captain Christopher Prusak of the 71st.
If they're flown by, extremely proficient pilots, which most of the, Air Force and Navy and Marine guys are, they are a formidable threat, but I feel that we have the advantage over them with the avionics suite that the F-15C has and its weapons that, when it comes to my choice of what I want to be fighting in the air, I want to be in the F-15.
Major J.R. Rust has been flying F-15s for 9 years, including wartime missions over Iraq.
I would say that the Eagle had a stellar performance, and the fact that it's got a lot of legs on the airplane, it can stay up there for a while because it's got a lot of station time, it's got a lot of firepower, and it's got a tremendous amount of radar. I would say the F-15, not having statistics readily available, but I would say it's probably one of the safest fighters that the Air Force has ever built. From where I sit and what I've been doing, I think it's one of the finest fighters ever built, bar none.
So here are the winning aircraft in each era, the finalists for Best Fighter. The Fokker D-7, the Supermarine Spitfire, the North American P-51 Mustang, the North American F-86 Sabre, the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, and the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle. Each one a great airplane in its time. Each one a dangerously capable fighting aircraft. Measuring all six against the evaluation criteria, the expert's choice of the best fighter, the North American P-51 Mustang. Take a look at the basics of the P-51D, the most successful model, most loved, and the one that helped turn the tide at a critical juncture of World War II. Maneuverability. Its pilots say it has the ideal blend of dive, climb, roll, turn, and acceleration. Visibility. The D model got the bubble canopy, giving pilots a 360-degree view of the sky around them. Range. With two drop tanks, 1,300 miles at 10,000 feet, over 1,600 miles at 25,000 feet, and at lower power settings, up to 2,000 miles. Firepower. 6 50-caliber machine guns. Good power, lightweight, and as accurate as they got during that period. Speed and ceiling. 437 miles per hour top speed and 25,000-foot operational ceiling. And the results. The U.S. airplane that shot down more enemy aircraft over Europe than any other model. P-51s flew over 213,000 sorties during wartime, and its pilots were responsible for 5,942 air-to-air kills. Its air combat kill-to-loss ratio an astounding 19-to-1. During 61 missions over Europe, Bob Goebel shot down 11 Luftwaffe pilots who came against him.
On one mission to Ploesti, quite by accident, I think, we stumbled into a flight of ME-109s. We more or less collided without seeing each other. It's very unusual on both sides. And we're kind of taken aback and immediately engaged each other in a furious fight. I shot down one ME-109. He came out. I looked down, I saw another one heading for the deck. I got on him and closed very rapidly because I was very fast. I was in war emergency boost and closed on him, got strikes all over his aircraft, and I perhaps was a little slow in getting off the trigger because his canopy came off and I saw him come hurtling out of the cockpit. But I think the rounds that I had fired were still in transit, and he may have been hit because I cocked it up on the wing and watched him fall, and his parachute didn't open, and he fell. He fell to his death in a plowed field there in Romania. But that was a long flight home, drenched with sweat, keyed up, and very, very low on fuel. I don't think I had more than some fumes left in the tanks when I finally got it home. And then the next day you're ready to go again. You know, you had to be young. You had to be young to do that kind of thing. For me, there was a personal attachment there, not only to the P-51D, but to my P-51D. I would liken it to the warm feeling that you get when you get up in the morning and you put on an old pair of shoes or something, and you just feel, it's an old friend. It was well thought out, well designed, and well built machine. And besides the fact that it came along at a time when it was desperately needed, no other fighters could go all the way to the target. So on the basis of its intrinsic value as a fighter airplane and the fact that it came along at a time when it was desperately needed, I think together is the reason why I would pick it as the best fighter of all time.
And for the future, what will the next fighters be like? Could they ever take the title Best Fighter? Already the next generation fighters are being developed. The Rafale from France, the Eurofighter from Germany, Great Britain, Italy, and Spain. New fighter designs from Russia, such as the Su-37. And from the United States, the F-22, now under development for the Air Force, is likely to be the first of the next century's all-new fighters to go into service. General Joe Ralston, the Air Force member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talks about it.
Well, there are several differences between the F-22 and the F-15 and F-16. First of all, I went to the first flight of the first F-15. That was in July of 1972, 24 years ago. So you have a whole different arena in terms of avionics, in terms of propulsion, in terms of aerodynamics, and of course, stealth. The F-22's stealth feature, I think, will give it the greatest improvement over the F-15 and F-16. But certainly its ability to supercruise and the situational awareness that you will get from the modern avionics is the big difference. Whenever we go into battle, we want to make sure that we provide our American young men and women flying our airplanes, not with just an airplane that is at parity with the enemy, but we want them to have overwhelming superiority.
From the U.S. and from other nations as well, these great airplanes were flown by gutsy pilots who did everything and anything they could to grab control of the skies and make the battle turn in their favor. And the P-51 Mustang, the greatest of them all, it had that blend of flying qualities, effectiveness, and pilots' intense loyalty and trust that airplane designers would love to create again in some fighter in the future.